The wagon lurched over a rut in the dirt road, and Clara Whitmore pressed her hand against the wooden seat to steady herself. Dust clung to everything, her dress, her skin, the inside of her mouth. Behind her, beneath a canvas tarp and hidden under 2 flour sacks, her daughter and son hadn't made a sound in over an hour. She couldn't breathe right. Every mile closer to Sage Creek felt like a noose tightening. The man beside her, Mr. Hoskins, the mail-order bride agent, hadn't stopped talking since they left Silver Ridge 3 days ago. His voice was a constant drone about weather and cattle prices and how fortunate she was that anyone would take her at all. Most men wouldn't bother with a widow, he said, spitting tobacco juice over the side of the wagon, especially one with your situation. Clara didn't answer. She'd learned that silence made him lose interest faster than arguing. Her situation, that's what everyone called it now. 6 months ago, she'd had a husband, a small house, and a life that made sense. Then the fever took Daniel, and the debts came crawling out like snakes from under rocks. The bank took the house. The town took her reputation when she couldn't pay what Daniel owed. And Mrs. Carlson, the boarding house owner, had made it clear that Clara had 2 choices: leave Silverton or work off her debt in ways that would destroy what little dignity she had left. So she'd answered the advertisement. Widow rancher in Wyoming Territory seeks capable woman for marriage, must be willing to work. No questions asked about the past. No questions asked. Those 4 words had felt like salvation. What the advertisement hadn't said was that Thomas Bridger needed a wife because the previous 2 had left him. One ran off with a traveling salesman. The other went back east after 6 months, claiming she couldn't stand the isolation. Hoskins had told her this with a mean little smile, like he enjoyed watching her realize she was the last resort of a last resort. "You'll do fine," Hoskins had said when she signed the contract. "Just keep your mouth shut about those kids, and maybe he won't send you packing before winter." The children, Emma was 7, Michael was 5. They looked like Daniel, same dark hair, same serious eyes. She'd told Hoskins she was traveling alone. She'd paid him extra money she'd borrowed from her sister to let her hide them in the wagon and not mention them in the correspondence. The plan was simple and desperate: get to the ranch, marry Thomas Bridger, and then confess. By then, maybe he'd be invested enough not to throw them all out. Maybe. It was a terrible plan, but it was the only one she had. The sun was dropping toward the horizon when they finally rolled into Sage Creek. It wasn't much of a town, a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church that needed paint, and maybe 20 other buildings scattered around like someone had tossed them from a handful and let them land where they would. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and gray against the orange sky. Hoskins pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. He said he'd meet us here at sundown. Clara's heart hammered. She glanced back at the tarp. "Stay quiet," she told them this morning. "No matter what you hear, don't move, don't make a sound, we'll be safe soon." Emma had nodded, solemn and scared. Michael had buried his face in his sister's shoulder. A man emerged from the store, and Clara knew immediately it was him. Thomas Bridger was tall, lean in the way of men who worked from dawn to dark and forgot to eat. He wore a hat pulled low, shadowing his face, and his clothes were clean but worn, the kind of worn that came from use, not poverty. He moved with the careful economy of someone who'd learned not to waste energy on unnecessary things. He stopped a few feet from the wagon and looked up at her. His face was weathered, lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and wind. Maybe 35, maybe older. His jaw was set in a way that suggested he didn't smile often. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. His voice was quiet, rough-edged. "Mr. Bridger," she tried to keep her voice steady. His gaze moved over her, quick and assessing, and she fought the urge to smooth her dress or tuck her hair back. She knew what he saw: a thin woman in a faded dress, pale from too many sleepless nights, with shadows under her eyes and hands that trembled slightly no matter how hard she tried to control them. "You look tired," he said. It wasn't what she'd expected. "It's been a long trip." He nodded once, then turned to Hoskins. "You have the papers." Hoskins pulled a folded document from his coat and handed it over. Bridger read it, his expression unreadable, then pulled out a leather wallet and counted bills into Hoskins's waiting hand. The transaction took less than a minute. Clara felt like livestock being sold, which wasn't far from the truth. "We'll head out now," Bridger said to her. "Ranch is about an hour northwest. I've got a wagon around back." "I have some belongings," Clara started, but her throat closed up. Her belongings were two small children hidden under canvas. "I see them." Bridger nodded toward her trunk strapped to the back of Hoskins's wagon. "I'll move it." He lifted the trunk easily and carried it toward the alley beside the store. Clara climbed down, her legs shaky. She needed to get the children into his wagon without him seeing. She needed. "There anything else?" Bridger called back. "No," she said too quickly, "nothing else." Hoskins smirked at her. "Good luck, Mrs. Whitmore, you're gonna need it." He snapped the reins and the wagon rolled forward. Clara watched it go, panic rising in her chest. The children were still in there. She'd meant to signal them somehow, get them out while Bridger was distracted, but everything was happening too fast. She hurried after the wagon. "Wait." But Hoskins was already 20 feet away, and Bridger had appeared beside her with his own wagon, a sturdy flatbed with two horses hitched to it. Something wrong. What could she say? Her mind raced. "I thought I forgot something, but it's fine." He studied her for a moment, those gray-blue eyes steady and unreadable. Then he nodded toward his wagon. "Best get moving, sun's almost down." Clara looked back at Hoskins's wagon disappearing down the street. Her children were in there, her children. She opened her mouth to confess everything, consequences be damned, but then she saw it, two small figures scrambling out from under the tarp and dropping to the ground behind the wagon, hidden from Hoskins's view. Emma grabbed Michael's hand and they darted toward the alley between the general store and the saloon. Relief and terror hit her in equal measure. They were out, they were exposed, they were alone in a strange town. "Mrs. Whitmore," Bridger's voice held a note of concern now. She forced herself to look at him. "I'm sorry, it's been a difficult few months." His expression softened slightly. "I imagine so, losing your husband." She nodded, unable to speak past the guilt, and fear lodged in her throat. "Well, you're here now." He offered his hand to help her up to the wagon seat. "Let's get you home." Home, the word felt like a lie. She took his hand, rough, calloused, warm, and climbed up. As they pulled away from the general store, she saw Emma and Michael huddled in the shadows of the alley, watching. Emma met her eyes, and Clara gave the smallest nod. "Follow the wagon. Stay hidden. Stay safe." The ride to the ranch was quiet. Bridger didn't seem inclined toward conversation, which suited Clara fine because she couldn't have managed it anyway. Her mind was consumed with the children walking behind them in the growing darkness, trying to follow a wagon on an unfamiliar road. What if they lost sight of them? What if someone saw them? What if? "You know how to cook?" Bridger asked, breaking into her spiral of panic. "Yes, clean. Yes, handle livestock." She hesitated. "I can learn." He glanced at her. "That's honest, at least." They rode on. The land opened up around them, rolling grassland that seemed to go on forever, broken by clusters of cottonwood trees and rock outcroppings. The air smelled like sage and dust, and something else she couldn't name. Distance, maybe, space. It was beautiful in a harsh, lonely way. "Why did you answer my advertisement?" Bridger asked suddenly. Clara's hands tightened in her lap. "I needed a new start." Most women want a new start in a city. Denver, San Francisco, not a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere. "I'm not most women." He made a sound that might have been agreement. "No, I suppose you're not." The ranch appeared as the last light bled from the sky. A main house, a barn, a few outbuildings scattered across a flat area with the mountains rising behind. It was bigger than she'd expected, more substantial. The house was 2 stories, wood frame, with a wide porch and windows that glowed with lamplight. "My foreman, Jack Delaney, and his wife, Mary, live in the bunkhouse," Bridger said as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "They're good people. They'll help you settle in." Clara climbed down, her legs unsteady. She could see the trees about 50 yards behind the barn, dark shadows in the twilight. Were the children there? had they made it. Bridger carried her trunk to the porch. "I'll show you inside. You must be hungry." "I'm not," but her stomach betrayed her with a growl. He almost smiled, almost. "Come on." The inside of the house was plain but clean, wooden floors, simple furniture, a stone fireplace. The kitchen was off to the left, the front room to the right, and stairs leading up to what she assumed were bedrooms. It smelled like coffee and wood smoke, and the particular emptiness of a house where no one had cooked a real meal in a long time. "There's stew on the stove," Bridger said. "Mary made it this morning. Your room is upstairs, first door on the left. We'll talk about the arrangement tomorrow. Get you settled first." Clara nodded, relief washing over her. He wasn't expecting her to share a room with him tonight. That was something, at least. "Thank you, Mr. Bridger." "Thomas," he said. "If we're going to be married, you should call me Thomas." Thomas, the name felt strange in her mouth. He shifted his weight, awkward. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything. Got a mare foaling tonight." He paused at the door. "Welcome to the ranch, Clara." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Clara waited 30 seconds, listening. When she was sure he wasn't coming back, she ran to the kitchen window and peered out toward the trees. She couldn't see anything in the darkness. Her heart pounded so hard she felt dizzy. She grabbed a lantern from the table, lit it, and slipped out the back door. The night air was cool, full of cricket's song and the distant sound of cattle. She hurried toward the trees, the lantern swinging. "Emma," she whispered as loudly as she dared. "Mike." Rustling, then two small figures emerged from the shadows, and Clara nearly collapsed with relief. She set down the lantern and dropped to her knees, pulling them both into her arms. Emma was shaking. Michael was crying silently, the way he'd learned to cry when they needed to be quiet. "You're safe," she whispered into their hair. "You're safe. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." "Mama, we got lost," Emma said, her voice small. "We couldn't see the wagon, and it got dark, and Michael fell in a hole." "But we found it," Michael added quickly. "We found the ranch. We remembered what you said about following the wagon tracks." Clara pulled back and looked at them, dirty, exhausted, terrified, her Barbies. "Listen to me. We can't let Mr. Bridger see you yet. I need to talk to him first, explain. But I need you to stay hidden just a little longer. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, but her eyes were huge and scared. "There's a barn," Clara said. "The big building near the house. I think I can get you inside. There'll be hay, somewhere warm to sleep. I'll bring you food, just tonight. Tomorrow I'll tell him everything." "What if he sends us away?" Emma whispered. Clara's chest ached. "He won't." But she didn't know that. She didn't know anything about Thomas Bridger, except that he needed a wife and she needed a home, and those were two very different kinds of desperation. She got them to the barn, while Bridger was occupied with the foaling mare in one of the stalls at the far end. She found a spot in the hayloft, hidden behind bales, and made them a nest with her shawl. She brought them stew and bread from the kitchen, water from the pump. They ate like they were starving, which they probably were. "Sleep now," she told them. "I'll come get you in the morning." But Emma grabbed her hand. "Don't leave us." "I have to. He'll wonder where I am." "Please." Clara stayed until they fell asleep, curled together like puppies. Then she climbed down from the loft and nearly screamed when she saw Thomas standing in the barn doorway, silhouetted against the night sky. Her mind went blank with terror. He took a step forward into the lamplight. His face was unreadable. The mare's fine, healthy colt. "That's good," Clara managed. He looked at her for a long moment, looked at the hayloft above, looked back at her. "You should get some rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He walked past her, out into the night. Clara stood frozen, her heart hammering. Did he know? Had he seen them? She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the small bedroom upstairs, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle around her. At dawn, she dressed quickly and went downstairs. Thomas was already in the kitchen, making coffee. "Morning," he said without looking at her. "Morning." He poured 2 cups, handed her one. The gesture felt strangely intimate. They stood in silence, drinking coffee, while the sun rose outside the window, painting the mountains gold. "I want to be clear about something," Thomas said finally. "I'm not looking for love, I don't expect it, and I'm not offering it. I need someone to help run this ranch and make this house a home, that's all." Clara nodded, her throat tight. "I understand." "Good," he set down his cup. "You can start by making breakfast. I'll be out checking the fence line." He left before she could respond. Clara made breakfast, eggs, bacon, biscuits, and when it was ready, she wrapped some in a cloth and carried it to the barn. Emma and Michael were awake, huddled in the hayloft. They fell on the food like wolves. "I'm going to tell him today," Clara said. "After lunch, I promise." But noon came and went, and she couldn't find the courage. Thomas was distant but not unkind. He showed her the ranch, the kitchen garden that needed tending, the chickens that needed feeding. He introduced her to Jack and Mary Delaney, who were polite but clearly curious about the new wife who'd appeared overnight. That evening, she snuck more food to the children. Emma was starting to look desperate. "Mama, please," she said. "I don't want to hide anymore." "Tomorrow," Clara promised. "I swear." But she was a coward. 3 days passed, then 4. The pattern became routine. She cooked and cleaned and worked in the garden during the day, snuck food and comfort to her children at night. Thomas was civil but distant, and she was grateful for the distance because it meant he didn't look too closely, didn't ask too many questions. On the 5th night, Mary Delaney came to the house after supper. "Can I speak plainly?" Mary asked. Clara tensed. "Of course." "Thomas is a good man. He's been hurt before and he's wary because of it, but he's trying." Mary paused. "Whatever you're hiding, it's going to come out. Secrets always do, and when it does, it'll hurt worse because you waited." Clara's face burned. "I don't know what you mean." Mary gave her a sad, knowing look. "I've seen you going to the barn at night. I know you're not meeting Thomas there." The floor seemed to drop away beneath Clara's feet. "I haven't told him," Mary continued. "That's your job, but you need to do it soon before someone else sees what I've seen." She left Clara standing in the kitchen, trembling. That night, Clara went to the barn and found Thomas there, grooming one of the horses. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Need something?" This was it. She had to tell him, had to trust that there was something in this quiet, wounded man that would understand, that would have mercy. "I lied to you," she said before she could lose her nerve. His hands stilled on the horse's flank. "About what?" "I'm not alone, I have." The words stuck in her throat. "I have children, a daughter and a son. They're here, in the barn." The silence that followed was crushing. Thomas set down the brush very carefully. "Show me." Clara's legs barely carried her to the ladder. She climbed up to the hayloft, Thomas following behind. Emma and Michael were awake, pressed together in their nest of hay, eyes wide with fear. Thomas stared at them, at Clara, back at the children. "How long have they been here?" "Since we arrived. I hid them in Hoskins's wagon. I was going to tell you, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you'd send us away." He climbed down from the loft without a word. Clara followed, her heart sinking. This was it. He would throw them out. They'd have nowhere to go, no money, no options. Thomas walked to the barn door and stood there, his back to her, hands braced on the frame. His shoulders were rigid. "Why didn't you tell me before you came?" His voice was low, controlled, angry. "Because no one wants a widow with 2 children." Hoskins said. "I don't give a damn what Hoskins said." He turned to face her, and his eyes were hard. "You lied. You snuck them here like contraband. You let me think I was getting one thing when you knew it was another. That's not how you start a marriage, Clara. That's how you start a business deal, and a bad one at that." Tears burned in her eyes. I know it was wrong, but I had no choice. I couldn't leave them behind, and if I'd told the truth, no one would have answered the advertisement. We would have starved or worse, and I couldn't," her voice broke. "I couldn't let that happen to them. So you made me the fool instead." "I'm sorry." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're sorry? Well, that's something, I suppose. He rubbed his face, suddenly looking exhausted. How old are they? Emma's 7, Michael's 5. They look half-starved. They've been eating. I've been bringing them food. At night, in secret, like thieves. He shook his head. Jesus, Clara. What are you going to do? The question hung in the air between them. Thomas looked back toward the hayloft, where she could just see Emma's face peering over the edge, pale and frightened. I don't know, he said finally. I need to think. He walked out of the barn, into the darkness. Clara climbed back up to the children and held them while they cried. She didn't have any words of comfort to offer. She'd gambled everything on a stranger's mercy, and she was about to find out if the bet would pay. Morning came harsh and bright. Clara got the children washed at the pump and brought them into the house through the kitchen door. They sat at the table, silent and scared, while she made breakfast with shaking hands. When Thomas came in from the barn, his boots heavy on the floor, all three of them froze. He stood in the doorway, looking at them. His face was unreadable. Breakfast is ready, Clara said quietly. Thomas pulled out a chair and sat down. Emma and Michael stared at him like he was a wolf that might pounce. Clara served the food, eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and no one spoke. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Thomas looked at Emma. What's your name? Emma, she whispered. And you? He nodded at Michael. Michael, can you work? Emma glanced at Clara, confused. Sir. Can you work? Thomas repeated. Feed chickens, gather eggs, help in the garden. Yes, sir. He looked at Michael. How about you? Michael nodded frantically. Thomas cut into his eggs, took a bite, chewed slowly. All right then, you'll start today. Emma, you'll help your mother with the house and garden. Michael, you'll work with me in the barn. We'll see how it goes. Clara's breath caught. You mean? He looked at her and his eyes were still hard, still hurt. I mean they can stay, for now, but we're going to have a conversation later, you and I, about trust and lies and what kind of marriage this is going to be. Relief crashed over her so hard she had to grip the table to stay upright. Thank you, Thomas, thank you. Don't, he stood up, pushing his chair back. Just don't. He left his plate half full and walked out. The days that followed were strange and tense. Thomas kept his word. He let the children stay, put them to work, even spoke to them kindly when he gave them instructions. But with Clara, he was distant, polite but cold. He didn't meet her eyes, didn't linger in rooms where she was. It was like living with a ghost. Emma thrived despite the tension. She loved the chickens, loved the garden, loved Mary Delaney, who taught her how to churn butter and bake bread. Michael was more hesitant, but Thomas was patient with him, showing him how to muck stalls and brush horses and mend fence wire. Clara watched them from the kitchen window and felt her heart crack open. This could have been good, could have been a real home, but she'd poisoned it before it had a chance to grow. 2 weeks after the confession, she found Thomas on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the mountains. She brought him coffee and stood beside him, gathering her courage. I understand why you're angry, she said. He didn't look at her. Do you? Yes, I violated your trust. I made you feel used. That about sums it up. My husband died owing money to half the town, Clara said, the words tumbling out now that she'd started. Money I didn't know about, gambling debts, loans he'd taken out and never told me about. When he died, people came for payment. They took our house, our furniture, everything. I had nothing, and 2 children to feed. Thomas was silent, but she could feel him listening. The boarding house owner offered me a job that wasn't really a job. You understand what I mean? Her voice shook. I couldn't do that, I wouldn't, so I answered your advertisement. And when Hoskins told me no man would take a widow with children, she swallowed hard. I made a choice, maybe the wrong choice, but it was the only one I could see. You could have told me the truth once you got here. I know I should have. I was just so scared you'd turn us away and we had nowhere else to go. No money for train fare, no family to take us in, nothing. Tears slid down her face. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to understand. Everything I've done for them, because they're innocent in all of this and they deserve a chance." Thomas turned to look at her finally. His expression had softened, just slightly. "What was your husband's name?" The question surprised her. Daniel Whitmore." "Was he good to you?" "Yes, until the gambling started. Then he changed, got desperate, secretive. By the end, I barely knew him." She wiped her eyes. "Why?" "Just trying to understand." He turned back to the sunset. "My first wife left because she said I was boring, said ranch life was too quiet, too lonely. The second one left because she wanted children and I couldn't give them to her. Some medical problem I have." His jaw tightened. "So when you showed up with kids hidden away like they were shameful, it felt like another rejection, like even you thought they made you worthless." "I never thought that," Clara said fiercely. "They're the most valuable thing in my life." "Then you should have trusted me with the truth." "You're right, I should have." She hesitated. Can we start over, not go back, but start from here?" Thomas looked at her for a long moment, then he held out his hand. "Thomas Bridger." She took it, feeling the calluses, the strength. "Clara Whitmore. Those your kids on my ranch?" "Yes. They good workers. The best." "All right then." He squeezed her hand once, then let go. "Let's see how this goes." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Summer turned to fall, and slowly, so slowly, things changed. Thomas smiled at breakfast one morning when Michael told a joke. He helped Emma fix a doll her father had made years ago, his big hands careful with the delicate carving. He didn't avoid Clara anymore, didn't leave rooms when she entered. They talked while washing dishes, about small things at first, weather, crops, the cattle, and then about bigger things. His childhood on a different ranch, her parents who'd died when she was young. Dreams they'd both given up. One night in October, Clara woke to the sound of Michael screaming. She ran to his room and found him thrashing in bed, caught in a nightmare. She held him, rocking and soothing, but he couldn't stop crying. Thomas appeared in the doorway, half-dressed, concerned. "What's wrong?" "Bad dream," Clara said. "He gets them sometimes, about his father dying." Michael sobbed into her shoulder. Thomas hesitated, then came and sat on the edge of the bed. He put a hand on Michael's back, gentle. "My dad died when I was about your age," Thomas said quietly. "Fell off a horse. I used to dream about it too." Michael looked up at him with tear-wet eyes. "You did?" "Yeah, for a long time, but you know what helped?" Thomas glanced at Clara, then back at Michael. "Having people around who made me feel safe. Sounds like you've got that now." Michael nodded, hiccuping. "I'm sorry I woke you up." "Don't be sorry for needing help." Thomas stood up. "Try to get some sleep. Morning comes early." He left the room, and Clara sat there with Michael in her arms, something warm and fragile blooming in her chest. The wedding was small, just them, the preacher, and Jack and Mary as witnesses. They stood in the church in Sage Creek on a cold November morning, and Clara wore the one good dress she'd brought from Silverton. Thomas wore a suit that looked like it had been packed away for years. He was nervous, she realized. His hands shook slightly when he slipped the plain gold band on her finger. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said. Thomas kissed her cheek, brief and chaste. And Clara felt the warmth of his mouth, even through her veil. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant, all five of them, because there was no pretending anymore that Emma and Michael weren't part of this. Michael fell asleep in his chair halfway through dessert, and Thomas carried him out to the wagon without being asked. Emma took Clara's hand as they walked to the street. "Do I call him Pa now?" Emma whispered. Clara looked at Thomas settling Michael in the wagon bed, tucking a blanket around him. "I think you can call him whatever feels right." "What if I want to call him Pa?" "Then I think he'd like that." On the ride home, Emma fell asleep too, her head on Clara's shoulder. Thomas drove the wagons slowly, careful not to jostle them. The moon was bright, turning the prairie silver. "Thank you," Clara said softly, "for this, for all of it." "You're my wife now," Thomas said. "They're my kids now, that's how it works." "Still, thank you." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They drove the rest of the way like that, connected in the cold night, heading toward the ranch that was finally, truly home. Winter came hard that year. The snow piled up past the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing. They spent long evenings in the front room, the fire crackling, while Emma practiced her letters and Michael built towers with wooden blocks. Clara sewed by lamplight, and Thomas read the newspaper, his reading glasses perched on his nose. It was quiet and ordinary and perfect. One night in January, after the children were asleep, Thomas found Clara in the kitchen. She was cleaning up after supper, her hands in soapy water. "Leave those," he said. "Come sit with me." They settled on the couch in front of the fire, and Thomas pulled her against his side. She fit there, she realized, like she was made for this space. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About how I said I wasn't looking for love. That day in the kitchen, remember?" Clara's heart skipped. "I remember." "I was wrong." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were soft in the firelight. "I wasn't looking for it, but I found it anyway, with you, with them, this whole messy, complicated family we've built." She couldn't speak. Tears blurred her vision. "I love you, Clara," he said. "I love those kids like they were mine from the start, and I don't care what anyone thinks or what the past was. This is what matters, us here now." "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for weeks, but I was afraid to say it." He kissed her then, properly this time, and it felt like coming home and starting fresh all at once. They sat together long after the fire burned down to embers, wrapped in blankets and each other, while outside the snow fell soft and endless on the ranch that had saved them both. Clara thought about the woman who'd stepped off that wagon 6 months ago, terrified, desperate, hiding her children like secrets. She barely recognized that woman anymore. The past couldn't be changed. The lies she'd told, the deception, the fear, it was all still there, woven into the foundation of what they'd built. But Thomas was right. This was what mattered, not how they'd started, but where they'd ended up. Together. The next morning, Michael was the first one downstairs. He found Thomas making coffee in the kitchen. "Morning," Thomas said. "Mornings, Pa." Thomas froze, the coffee pot halfway to his cup. Michael stood in the doorway in his nightshirt, sleep-tousled and small, looking at him with hope and uncertainty. Thomas set down the pot carefully. "Yeah, buddy. Can I help you with the horses today?" "Course you can." Thomas's voice was rough. "Always got room for my boy." Michael beamed and ran off to get dressed. Thomas stood alone in the kitchen, and when Clara came downstairs a minute later, she found him with his head bowed, shoulders shaking. She put her arms around him from behind. "You okay?" He turned and pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "He called me Pa." "I know. I never thought," his voice broke, "I never thought I'd have this." "Neither did I." She held him tighter. "But we have it." And they did, not because everything was perfect or because the past didn't matter. They had it because they'd chosen each other again and again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Clara stood on the porch looking out at the snow-covered land, the mountains dark against the stars. Thomas came out and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "What you thinking about?" She leaned back against him. "That I was sold as worthless, and you found me anyway. And you found them too, even though I tried to hide them, and somehow that made everything possible." He kissed the top of her head. "You were never worthless, you just hadn't found the right place yet." "Is this it?" she asked. "The right place?" "Yeah," he said, "this is it." And standing there in the cold night air, wrapped in her husband's arms with her children safe and warm inside, Clara knew he was right. She'd been lost, desperate, reduced to a lie on paper and a secret in the dark. But Thomas had looked past all of that and seen her, seen them. And that sight, that recognition, had given her back herself. It was more than she'd hoped for, more than she'd dreamed. It was everything.